The smile that hid a monster, the sound of a ceramic mug shattering against the hardwood floor is something I'll never forget. Some people remember the day their lives changed because of a phone call. Others remember a knock at the door. For me, it was the sound of coffee spilling across polished oak and the terrifying silence that followed. By the time I reached the living room, my wife, Helen, was lying motionless on the floor. A thin stream of blood ran from the side of her head, slowly spreading across the rug she had proudly picked out almost 20 years earlier. Standing only a few feet away was the man responsible, Arnold Benson. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't trying to help. He wasn't even pretending to care. Instead, he looked down at Helen with the coldest smile I'd ever seen. Then he looked directly into my eyes. She lost her balance," he said calmly. "If anyone asks, that's what happened." Before I could answer, he stepped over the broken coffee mug, straightened his expensive jacket, and walked out of my house as if he had just finished discussing the weather. The front door closed. His truck disappeared down the street. Only then did I drop to my knees beside Helen. "Helen, sweetheart, stay with me." My hands trembled as I pressed a kitchen towel against the wound on her head. Blood soaked through the fabric almost immediately. I dialed emergency services with fingers that barely obeyed me. The dispatcher kept talking. Sir, can you hear me? Is she breathing?" "Basher? Yes. Barely. Keep pressure on the wound." Those few minutes felt longer than the previous 64 years of my life. The ambulance arrived quickly. Paramedics rushed inside. One checked Helen's pulse while another prepared oxygen. They loaded her onto a stretcher and hurried toward the ambulance. I climbed into my pickup and followed behind, praying to God that I wouldn't lose the woman who had spent 41 years standing beside me, through every joy and every hardship life had thrown at us. As I drove toward Memorial Hospital, one question echoed inside my mind. How had it come to this? The answer wasn't simple. It had started years earlier, long before blood stained my living room floor, long before Arnold's smile became something I feared. It started the day my daughter introduced us to the man she insisted was the love of her life. Uppercut, Arnold arrived wearing a tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to him. His handshake was firm, too firm, the kind of handshake meant to establish dominance instead of friendship. "I'm Arnold Benson," he said proudly. "I own one of the fastest-growing construction companies in Texas." For the next 2 hours, Arnold talked almost exclusively about himself. His business, his income, his investments, his expensive vacations, his luxury pickup. Every conversation somehow returned to one subject: Arnold. Whenever someone else tried speaking, he redirected the attention back to himself. At first, I assumed he was simply nervous. Helen wasn't convinced. That night, after Clementine and Arnold left, she quietly washed dishes while I dried them. Without looking at me, she whispered, "Did you notice how he never once asked about us?" I shrugged. "Maybe he's just ambitious." She shook her head. "No. There's something missing behind his smile." I laughed gently. "I think you're worrying too much." Looking back now, I wish I had listened. The wedding took place 11 months later. It was beautiful. Our daughter looked happier than I'd ever seen her. Arnold stood proudly beside her, smiling for every photograph. Everyone congratulated them. Everyone believed they had a bright future ahead. Everyone, except Helen. During the reception, she squeezed my hand. "I hope I'm wrong." "So do I," I replied. Neither of us realized that those would become some of the saddest words we'd ever speak. The changes happened slowly, almost invisibly. At first, family dinners became less frequent, then birthdays, then holidays. Whenever we invited Clementine over, Arnold always seemed to have another plan: a business meeting, a weekend trip, an important client. Eventually, our daughter stopped calling every week, then every month. When she did answer the phone, her voice sounded different, quieter, more careful, as though someone was listening nearby. Helen noticed immediately. She's changing. I tried convincing myself it was simply marriage. People get busy, life changes, families grow. But deep inside, I knew Helen was right. One Sunday afternoon, Helen baked Clementine's favorite chocolate cookies. She packed them into a small tin and asked if we could surprise them. When we arrived, Clementine hugged us tightly. Arnold barely looked up from his phone. Helen smiled warmly. I made your favorite. Opened the container, took one look, closed it. We're trying to eat healthier. His tone wasn't rude. It was worse. It was dismissive. Helen apologized immediately. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You never ask, Arnold replied. The room fell silent. On the drive home, Helen stared out the window. I was only trying to do something nice. I reached across the seat and held her hand. I know. But somehow, that wasn't enough. Every visit became another opportunity for Arnold to criticize someone. Helen folded laundry incorrectly. She bought the wrong groceries. She arrived too early. She stayed too late. Nothing she did was ever acceptable. And somehow, she always apologized. One evening, I finally asked why. Helen, why do you keep saying sorry? She smiled sadly. Because if I don't, he'll take it out on Clementine. That answer broke something inside me. Arnold crosses a line that changes everything forever when a family gathering turns into a nightmare. And Merle quietly begins preparing a plan that will eventually destroy the empire Arnold spent years building. For a while, I convinced myself that Arnold's behavior was nothing more than arrogance. Plenty of successful people developed oversized egos. It didn't necessarily make them dangerous. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first real warning came on a rainy Thursday evening. Helen had invited Clementine and Arnold over for dinner. She spent the entire afternoon preparing their favorite meals: roast chicken, homemade mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and the peach cobbler our daughter had loved since childhood. By the time they arrived, the table looked like something from a holiday celebration. Helen smiled proudly. I hope you're hungry. Clementine smiled back. It smells amazing, Mom. Arnold barely glanced at the table. As soon as he sat down, he frowned. You still use this old china? Helen looked confused. Yes, we've had it for years. He picked up a plate and examined it like a judge inspecting evidence. My grandmother had dishes like these. They belonged in a museum. He laughed. No one else did. Helen quietly reached for the serving spoon, pretending not to hear him. Throughout dinner, Arnold criticized everything. The chicken was too dry. The potatoes had too much butter. The bread wasn't warm enough. Even the coffee was cheap. Helen apologized after every complaint. I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. Those words became so common that they sounded automatic. When dessert was served, Clementine accidentally spilled a little juice on the tablecloth. Before Helen could grab a towel, Arnold slammed his hand against the table. The loud bang startled everyone. What is wrong with you? He snapped at Clementine. Can you do anything without making a mess? The room froze. Clementine's smile disappeared instantly. She lowered her head like a frightened child. It's okay, Helen said softly, reaching for the napkins. I'll clean it. Arnold pointed toward Helen. This is exactly why she never learns. You fix every mistake she makes. I slowly placed my fork on the table. That's enough. Arnold looked at me for the first time that evening. Excuse me? You heard me. This is our home. You don't raise your voice at my daughter. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Arnold smiled, not because he was amused, because he enjoyed confrontation. He leaned back in his chair. I think we're leaving. Without another word, he stood. Clementine immediately followed him. Before walking out, she whispered to Helen, I'm sorry. Helen hugged her tightly. You never have to apologize to me. The front door closed. Silence filled the house. Helen slowly gathered the untouched dessert plates. I noticed her hands shaking. I ruined dinner, she whispered. I walked over and gently held her shoulders. No. You didn't ruin anything. He did. She looked at me with watery eyes. I just want our family back. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Over the next several months, Arnold became even more controlling. He decided where Clementine could go, who she could talk to, how often she could visit us. Even simple phone calls became difficult. Whenever Helen called, Arnold usually answered, Clementine's busy. We'll call later. Later almost never came. One afternoon, Helen sat on our porch holding her phone. She'd called 3 times. No answer. She sighed. I miss my little girl. I wrapped my arm around her. So do I. Neither of us knew that Clementine wanted to call. Arnold simply wouldn't allow it. A few weeks later, we attended Maya's 7th birthday party. It should have been one of the happiest days of the year. Instead, it became another painful reminder of what our family had become. Helen spent hours wrapping gifts. She even knitted Maya a small pink sweater by hand. Then she told me about an email she had discovered 7 months earlier. It was a draft of my new will. She had been removed. Everything was being redirected to Vivian, and Cassandra would receive a trust. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She looked down. Because I didn't know if you had asked for it. You knew I would never do that. I hoped. Her voice broke. But I didn't want to accuse someone you loved. I reached for her hand. I'm sorry. She shook her head. I started keeping notes. She had even suspected the wine. She had noticed that I became slower and more forgetful after drinking it. Months earlier, she had quietly contacted Marcus and suggested that my blood should be checked. She had been right. Claire looked at me. We've both been investigating them, I smiled sadly, from opposite sides. She nodded. Now we know the truth. I looked at the notebook. There was only one question left. How do we expose them? The answer came the next morning. Alara's annual gala. 400 guests, executives, investors, designers, journalists, and most importantly, Vivian and Cassandra. Reyes would have officers inside the building. Marcus would have the financial evidence secured. And Claire would be there, not as a frightened intern, not as the girl they had humiliated. She would walk into that ballroom knowing exactly who she was. The next evening, I wore the black suit Diana had helped me choose years ago. Claire stood beside me. Her ribs were still bruised. Her wrist was still wrapped. But she refused to stay home. I want them to see me, she said. I nodded. Then they'll see you. When we entered the ballroom, hundreds of people were already there. Music filled the room. People laughed. Champagne glasses clinked. Vivian looked completely comfortable. She believed she was still in control. At 7:40, she walked onto the stage. She took the microphone. and began accusing an unnamed employee of damaging an expensive gown. Then Cassandra joined her. She looked directly toward Claire. A person like her should never have been trusted with something that valuable. The room turned toward my daughter. Claire remained silent. I stood. Vivian saw me. Her smile disappeared. I walked toward the stage. The room slowly became quiet. I took the microphone. My name is Raymond Holt. I looked around the ballroom, and I believe everyone here deserves to know the truth. Vivian whispered my name. Raymond, what are you doing? I looked directly at her. For the first time in years, I'm doing what I should have done from the beginning. I lifted the first photograph. Cassandra's face changed. Then I lifted the second. Vivian stopped breathing. I smiled without humor. You thought you were destroying my daughter. I looked at both women. But you made one mistake. I paused. You underestimated her father. The ballroom had gone completely silent. But I hadn't yet revealed the most dangerous piece of evidence. The one that could connect the attack on Claire's car to the people standing on that stage. And when Detective Reyes walked through the doors carrying the warrants, Vivian finally realized that this birthday surprise had become the day her entire, carefully constructed life began to collapse. The room became completely silent. 400 people were staring at me. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Vivian, the woman who had stood beside me for years, the woman I had trusted with my home, my money, and my life, the woman who had just tried to destroy my daughter in front of everyone. I held up the first photograph. This is Cassandra. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Cassandra's face went pale. I lifted the second photograph. And this is Cassandra, 3 days before my daughter's accident. Her mother grabbed her arm. Cassandra, don't say anything. That was the moment Detective Reyes entered the ballroom. Behind him were several officers dressed in plain clothes. Cassandra looked toward the exit. Then she ran. She didn't get far. 2 officers blocked the doors. Cassandra Marsh, Reyes said, you need to come with us. She froze. Vivian turned toward me. What have you done? I looked at her calmly. What I should have done months ago. I took another document from my jacket. Your real name isn't Vivian Holt. Her face changed. For the first time, I saw genuine fear. It's Vera Maslow. The room erupted in whispers. People began raising their phones. Cameras turned toward her. She tried to speak, but no words came out. I continued. Your background was fabricated. Your identity was constructed years ago, and nearly $840,000 disappeared from our accounts through a company connected to you and Cassandra. Vivian shook her head. That's a lie. I held up the financial records, then explained the transfers. She couldn't. I turned toward the audience. There is more. I showed them the security footage of Cassandra cutting the designer gown. The room became louder. That gown was the same one Claire had been accused of damaging. Then I explained what had happened to my daughter. She was blamed for something she didn't do. I looked at Claire. She was humiliated. Then I looked back at the room. And shortly afterward, she ended up in a hospital. Vivian shouted, "You have no proof that Cassandra caused the accident." Detective Reyes stepped forward. "We have forensic evidence." Cassandra began crying. "Mom." Vivian looked at her. For a second, they seemed to realize that neither could save the other. Then another man approached Marcus. Derek Sloan, my former estate attorney. He looked terrified. "Mr. Webb," he whispered, "we can make an arrangement." Marcus didn't answer. Derek kept talking. "I can explain everything." Marcus quietly turned on his phone's recording function. Derek didn't notice. Within minutes, he had said enough. He admitted that Vivian had pressured him to prepare documents that would remove Claire from my estate. He admitted that he had been paid privately, and he admitted he knew about the money transfers. His own words became another piece of evidence. I walked toward Claire. She was standing near the table. Her ribs were still bruised. Her wrist was wrapped, but she was standing straight. I put my arm around her carefully. Then I turned toward the room. "This is my daughter." Nobody spoke. "Claire Holt." I paused. "She earned her position at this company without using my name." I looked around the ballroom. She didn't ask me for favors. She didn't ask me to buy her a job. She wanted to prove she could succeed without being known as my daughter. I looked at the executives who had ignored her. Instead, people in this room decided that because she was young and quiet, she could be mistreated. Claire squeezed my hand. I continued. They were wrong. I took a breath. As of yesterday, I became the majority owner of this company. The ballroom erupted again. 60%. That was the number that changed everything. The people who had watched Claire suffer now realized that the man standing beside her controlled the company. But that wasn't what mattered most to me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my daughter to know she had been believed. Later that night, Vivian asked to speak with me. She was being held while the investigation continued. I didn't go inside. I stood outside the glass. She looked completely different without an audience. No perfect smile, no confident posture, no carefully chosen words. Just a tired woman sitting alone. The officer told me she had said something when she was brought in. I never planned to stay this long. I never understood exactly what she meant. Maybe she had planned to leave after getting my money. Maybe she had intended to disappear years earlier. Maybe she thought she could control everything forever. I don't know. And some questions don't receive answers. The important thing was that she could no longer hurt Claire. Cassandra eventually accepted a plea agreement and faced prison time, restitution, and a permanent restraining order. Vivian was ordered to repay the money taken from our accounts and faced supervised probation and mandatory counseling. The executive who had helped sabotage Claire's evaluations was removed from her position. Janet's role in the entire situation was finally understood. She had been threatened. She had refused to cross the one line that mattered. Her record remained clean, and on the following Monday, she returned to work. Her coffee was already waiting on her desk. Claire returned to Alara, too. But she refused to go back as an intern. She accepted a leadership position in creative development. There was only one condition. She wanted to earn it. No special treatment, no shortcuts, no favors because of her father. She wanted her work to speak for her. And I respected that. Months passed. Life slowly became normal again. One December morning, I drove down Wilshire Boulevard. I saw the same street vendor. I stopped, and I bought 2 bunches of sunflowers. When I reached Claire's office, she smiled when she saw them. She still had the original birthday flowers. They were dried now. Their petals had curled. Their color had faded. But she had kept them. "You still have those?" I asked. She smiled. "Until they're completely gone." I sat across from her. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then I told her the truth. I should have noticed. She shook her head. "You trusted someone." "I trusted a performance." She looked at me. I continued. "That's different." For 2 years, I had watched what Vivian wanted me to see. I had mistaken comfort for safety. I had mistaken kindness for loyalty. And I had ignored small patterns because believing them was easier than confronting what they might mean. That experience changed me, but it also taught me something I will never forget. The people